All right, so welcome, Elena. I leave the floor to you. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Valeria. Thank you, all of you. Thank all of you, Valeria, Tina, and Sanya for the nice invitation, and Tom and Lara for agreeing in discussing the book with me. I realized that it is a bit weird to present an Italian book in English, but I hope that it will work anyway. And I am trying to put together a proposal in order to see whether I can translate the book, but that is another project. So for the moment, it is in Italian. Sorry. So we thought of that I speak first, and I will try to give a sort of a general overview of the book. So the approach and the topics that are discussed and so on and so forth, and then I will focus on a more specific issue, which I think can give a more concrete idea of how I try to address environmental, let's say, topics connected to the environment in my book. So I will try to share my screen because I have a PowerPoint presentation. Okay. Okay, and I will also. So I don't know how it works for questions. For me, if you wanna ask a question, so while I'm talking, yeah, of course I should have stopped talking while you ask question. For me, it's okay, but I don't know how it works with you. So I leave Valeria to decide that. Okay. Yeah. Okay, let's start with how. Okay, the book is entitled Filosofia dell'ambiente, philosophy of the environment, right? And a first thing that should be said related to the book is that in this book, environmental philosophy is not identified or reduced to environmental ethics. In the sense that it often happened to me that when I'm asked what I do, and I say, yeah, I work in environmental philosophy and philosophy of biology mainly, the answer is, yeah, so you work on ethics, okay? But actually, I'm not an ethicist. So the main attempt with this book, with this book has been to decouple, so to speak, a philosophy of the environment from environmental ethics. That means that, of course, there is environmental ethics, but environmental philosophy, in my opinion, is a larger field. And in the book, philosophy of the environment, environmental philosophy, is understood as a broader inquiry into the concept of the environment. Okay, and so in this sense, I started with a history of the concept. And that has been harder than I thought, because there's no history of the environment as far as I know. There's no history of the concept as far as I know. And actually, my first chapter is an attempt to build a story of the concept that followed mainly an article written by Conguiem. And it has been really a challenge because, you know, the concept of the environment is very polysemic. It has a lot of meanings, okay? It is used in a lot of fields, and it is used in a lot of cultures, and there are, because when you wanna do a history of a concept, you normally follow the word, right? So you look at when the term environment has been used for the first time, etc., etc. But with environment is difficult because you have different words like milieu in French or environnement in French, and you have environment in English that comes from the French word. And the milieu is a bit different from the environment, okay? But today they are used as often as synonyms, okay? And then you have medio ambiente, I think in Spanish too, that is used for the natural environment, okay? So that is what I tried to do in the first chapter. I tried to build a story, okay? Of course, it is a perspectival one in the sense that I had to make choices. And to do that, I also tried to, in doing that, I also tried to, let's say, to narrow the field in the sense that, as I was saying, environment is a term and is a concept that is used in a lot of meanings, with a lot of meanings. You can say, I mean, if I say, I don't know, I feel out of place when I'm out of my environment, or if I say human beings are destroying the environment, I am meaning two different things with environment, right? And you can also speak of environment of, let's say, inanimate objects, for instance. So I focused my attention to the environment of living beings. So environment is a very, let's say, in a way, is a sort of formal concept, okay? There is an environment every time that there is something, because the environment from Latin is just the present participle of ambire, so surrounding, okay? But since the book is somehow intended to provide some instruments, some conceptual instruments to better understand the current environmental crisis, I focused the analysis on the environment of living beings, okay? And so in doing so, after having traced let's say, the lines of a history of the concept, I provide, and in the history, let's say, the main moment, so to speak, is when the modern concept of environment has been, let's say, coined, or it is when it is emerged, okay? And according to some historical reconstruction, the concept emerged around in 1838 first time with a theory of the milieu by Comte, and in 1855 thanks to the work of Herbert Spencer. But the idea in the modern concept of the environment is that the concept of environment is, let's say, the relatum, okay, of the binomial organism-environment, and between the two relata there is a relation. Okay, for Comte, this relation was a feedback. So the organism changes the environment, and the environment goes back to change the organism. Okay, so you cannot think of an environment without an organism, and you cannot think of an organism without an environment. Okay, and this correlation is what, for instance, evolutionary biology tried to explain through the concept of adaptation. Okay, so in the second chapter of the book, I tried to provide what can be called a metaphysical theory of the environment based on the causal relationship between organisms, not just organisms actually, also species, or the life as a whole, what Vernadsky called the living matter. Okay, so the idea that there are causal relationships, three different kinds of causal relationship. So there is one that goes, a linear causal relation that goes from the environment to the organism, another linear relation that goes from organism to the environment, and then there is a feedback relation between the two. Okay, this is what I tried to do in the second chapter at different levels, so at the level of individual organism, but also at the level of the entire biosphere. So the living matter and its environment. Okay, and then in the third, Oh, it's not moving. Okay, and of course, when we speak of living beings, we also speak of human beings, okay? And so in the third and fourth chapter, I've tried to apply the theory that I developed in the second chapter to our species. So I tried to understand our species as just one species among others, because from a Darwinian point of view, that's it. And I devoted to I devoted to human environment, to the human environment, 2 chapters, and it will become clear why in a short while. And all these, as I was saying, somehow brought to the 5th and last chapter, in which I tried to think about the current environmental crisis using what has been developed in the previous chapters. Okay, and what I would like to focus on today is mainly this last part, so chapter 3 and 4, and I will just tackle one topic. But I think that it is that can be of general interest, and because it is a general and let's say a fundamental topic, which is the relation between natural and artificial. Okay, and my idea, the idea that I try to develop in the book, is that human, just like other species, are subject to the action of the environment, and they construct their environment. Sorry, I cannot switch the slide because I'm not able. Okay. So the one of the issues that I try to discuss in the 3rd and 4th chapter is whether the traditional nature-artificial distinction is an adequate heuristic tool to deal with such a construction. Okay, and the starting point and the reason why my treatment of the human environment has been divided into 2 parts is that if we look at the Stockholm Declaration, okay, the Stockholm Declaration is the Stockholm Conference was the first world conference to make the environment a major issue. So it has been the first global conference devoted to the environment. Okay, it was 1972, and in the declaration that followed the conference, you can read these, and I'm going to read it because I think it includes really a lot of things to think about. First is that okay, and it is written that man is but a creature and molder of his environment, which gives him physical sustenance and affords him the opportunity for intellectual, moral, social, and spiritual growth. In the long and tortuous evolution of the human race on this planet, a stage has been reached when, through the rapid acceleration of science and technology, man has acquired the power to transform his environment in countless ways and on an unprecedented scale. Both aspects of man environment, the natural and the man-made, are essential to his well-being and to the enjoyment of basic human rights, even the right to life itself. So I'm interested in this part. Okay, also the other parts are very interesting because I mean, they're speaking of what are called the ecosystem services, and in the very first part, that is the idea that I was saying before. So the idea that an organism play a double role in within its environment, in the sense that you cannot separate the 2 relata in the organism-environment binomial. Okay, but what I would like to discuss today is this part. So the fact that the natural and man-made environment, so the environment of human beings seems to include these two components, okay? So the question is whether the distinction is well-founded, okay? And whether it applies to other species as well. And in a way, it is a very fundamental distinction, right? It is part of how we think about the world. It is part of how we think of ourselves, our place in the world, etc., etc. But it is not so so plain to find a good fundament of the distinction, in my opinion. Okay, just to think about. Okay, think for instance of ecosystem engineering. Okay, these are beaver dams, and these are other construction made by organisms, right? But organisms also construct their environment, not just building material, not just building material things. They also construct the environment through their metabolism, right? So we do the same thing in a way, because the two dams are not so different. They play the same role, so to speak. We build cities that make our environment more stable and safe for ourselves, and we also mimic what the forests do. Okay, so why we think that there is, if there is, I don't know. This is the question that I try to tackle in one part of the book. Okay, why we think that there is a substantial difference, a categorical difference between what we do and what other organisms do, because if we look at these products of the activities of organisms, it's not so clear, in my opinion, whether there is a distinction. So let's say that we have humans and their activities, okay, and then we have a first possibility, which is that humans and their activities humans and their activities are a part of nature, okay, or we can say that they are separated from nature, right? So if we go with our intuition that somehow human beings and their activities are separated from nature, so that there is a distinction between what we do, what we are, and what we do, and the rest of nature. This means that human beings enjoy, and their activities enjoy a peculiar status compared to mere natural entities, right? And this has a very long philosophical tradition. This thought has a very long philosophical tradition that probably started with Aristotle, right? That said that human beings, as other organisms, are made by matter and forms. They have a soul, but their soul is made of two components. It is made of an active intellect and a passive intellect. And the passive intellect is, let's say, material. It's tied to their being organisms. But the active intellect doesn't change. So it is more similar to the unmoved motor than to the organic, so to speak, part. So let's say that if we follow this path, human beings enjoy a peculiar status in virtue of some special relation with some supernatural being, okay? For instance, this happens in religious narratives. Or they have a peculiar state in virtue of their minds, okay? And this also has a very long even if shorter than the other one. But this has a long philosophical tradition. So the idea is that our minds are special somehow, right? So for Descartes, for instance, human beings are a war machine exactly as every other organism, but still they had the res cogitans that other organisms didn't have. So in this sense, the philosopher Val Plumwood spoke of a human exceptionalism. So the idea that somehow human beings enjoy a sort of exceptional ontological status, okay? But the Darwinian evolutionary theory has showed two things. First, that the presence of human beings on Earth can be explained without resorting to a creator. So this link with this, let's say, this special relation with a supernatural being is not so well founded. And also show that the human mind is nothing else than the product of million years of natural selection, conserving adaptive random mutations and discharging non-adaptive ones. So in a Darwinian framework, human exceptionalism is not so easy to justify, okay, to be justified. So let's say that from a Darwinian point of view, human beings are nothing but one species among others. So human beings are part of nature, okay? But there is one risk here, and the risk is a let it be attitude. If human beings are a part of nature and everything they do is a part of nature, then that means that everything goes somehow. For instance, I don't know, think about nature conservation, policies and practices, etc., etc. I mean, the nature-artificial distinction is somehow very used in environmental discourses and in conservation practices. So let's see, in a way, as I was saying, the idea that human beings and their activities and products are a part of nature seems to be better founded than human exceptionalism. However, if a human and their activities are natural, it follows, for instance, that Chicago is no less a phenomenon of nature than is the Great Barrier Reef, and this is Calicut, okay? Or it follows that the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is natural, and that its since its elemental components are the remains of the dinosaurs that our species replaced. So as I was saying, the nature-artificial distinction is not only well entrenched in our mind, but it is also part of how we, it also is a part of the way in which we think about the environmental crisis and the way in which we frame our environmental discourses and policies, okay? So in a way, the problem of that view is what Elliot Sober called one of the philosophical problems of environmentalism in a very beautiful article of 1986. So he says that if we are part of nature, then everything we do is part of nature, okay? And this is the very general idea, but in a way, we don't want that. So what I try to see in the book is whether there is a way out of the impasse. Okay, so the impasse is. So I asked myself if there is any consistent way of recognizing at the same time the naturalness of human beings and their production, and the artificialness. Sorry, if there is a way to recognize. At the same time, the naturalness of human beings and the artificialness of their production. So if we can somehow disagree with Sober that if we are a part of nature, then everything we do is a part of nature, okay? Because yeah, of course, human beings are natural, they're organisms, etc., etc. But is there a way to say that their production, maybe some of them are not natural? And I discussed two different, actually I discussed three, but I don't have time to go through all of them. So I will discuss the two more let's say, historical, the two more rooted in the philosophical tradition, okay? And the first one is an Aristotelian solution, okay? In the second book of the physics, Aristotle explained that the difference between artifacts and natural things is that natural things have the principle of change, of movement and changing themselves, while on the contrary, artificial things have the principle, let's say, from the outside. And in order to explain these, in order to give a concrete example, he says, yeah, actually, if you planted a bed and rotting wood acquired the power of sending up a shoot, it would not be a bed that would come out, right? That would come up, but wood, which shows that the arrangement in accordance with the rules of the art is merely an accidental attribute, okay? So the idea, let's say in an Aristotelian solution, is that from the naturalness of the maker, it does not ipso facto follow the naturalness of the product. So every production for Aristotle, no matter the maker, is an artifact. So, but it is. I think it is a very elegant solution because following Aristotle, we can say that the process of constructing the dam, the beaver dam, is natural because it is in the nature of the beaver to build a dam. Okay, if it were a cat building a dam, that process wouldn't be natural. Okay, but so the process of constructing the dam is natural because it is in the nature of the beaver to build a dam, but the dam is not natural because it is not in the nature of the wood to become a dam. Okay, the wood would have become something else. It would the tree would have been grown, etc., etc. Now, the Aristotelian solution has the advantage of being logically coherent, but it has a disadvantage because it is quite at odds with environmental policies and nature conservation. Because normally, when we let's say when we speak of conserving nature, we speak of conserving things like beaver and their dams as well, right? So it doesn't seem. I mean, it is a logically beautiful and elegant solution, in my opinion, but it doesn't work well with environmental policies and practices. Okay, there is another one. And I have almost finished, yes, 26 minutes. And this one comes from John Stuart Mill. Mill said, yeah, the natural artificial, and it consists in saying that the natural artificial distinction is not founded in science, but in common sense view. Okay. So from the scientific point of view, nature, in a technical sense, so to speak, nature means the sum of all phenomena together with the causes which produce them. Right? So it is in that sense that we speak of, I don't know, for the sciences of nature, okay? Natural sciences. And accordingly, in the true scientific sense, and here I am quoting John Stuart Mill, art is as much nature as anything else, and everything which is artificial is natural. However, he adds, this is not the mode in which the word is familiarly employed, okay? In another sense, it means artificial. In another sense, it means what takes place without the agency of man, okay? So in a common sense way, artificial is what takes place without the agency of man, while natural is, nature is what takes place without the agency of man, okay? So this solution has the advantage of being logically coherent as well as the Aristotelian one. It has a disadvantage, okay? The disadvantage is that naturalness, because let's say natural artificial distinction is not founded in science, is not scientifically well founded, okay? naturalness seems to become a somehow subjective, conventional, language-dependent property. Okay. Yeah, and so what I've asked myself is that really a disadvantage? And I don't think so, because, for instance, it helps into account for the fact that other species do not seem to recognize the distinction. Okay, in the first picture, you can see a bird nest. Sorry, I'm a bit tired. A bird nest in which you can find cigarettes. Why? Because birds have discovered that cigarettes can help in keeping parasites away from their nests, and so they are using them. Okay, and this is it is an article that went out, I think, in Nature. I don't remember, but they also they made some experiments to confirm that birds were used cigarettes in that way, and actually it seems so, right? So they just found that thing in their environment. They discovered that it was useful, and they used it. Okay. As for the plastic, the so-called plastic patch, that it offers another interesting example, because in those plastic patches, new species communities have established that were not present before, because those are species that used those are typical of less. Sorry, you cannot find those species normally in the open ocean. Okay, but since there is this new structure, they can use it. Okay, and so they established there. Of course, I'm not saying that plastic is not a problem. Here, I'm just saying that it's not an environmental problem. It is. I'm just saying that the other organisms do not seem to recognize as salient, as fundamental as we recognize it, the natural artificial distinction. It also accounts a million solution for the fact that naturalness can be conceptualized in different ways from different cultures, and even from the same person in different moments of its life. And there are some studies that show that. So, and for the fact that naturalness can be given different values in different times, right? Today we are giving, since I'm here, we are giving a positive value to nature, but in the 50s, for instance, nature was not so positively valued. Okay. So, and that's all. Thank you very much for the attention. I think that we can discuss these all together now. So thank you. And I try to stop. Okay. Okay. And I think that I used half an hour.
Thank you, Elena.
I didn't want to bore you too much. So, okay.
Absolutely. Thanks for, it was a tour de force. It was great to hear like a map of the book, and also to end on this like more accessible maybe point of questioning and entry point, I would say, onto much larger debates. I can see that Lara just got disconnected briefly, but hopefully she's
I admitted her.
Okay.
My connection just went away for a moment, sorry.
So Lara, you didn't hear anything of what I said?
Not the last part, sorry.
It doesn't matter, you had the slides.
So I'm not sure what's the best to proceed, Lara. Would you like to have a moment to rejoin conversations, and maybe I'll let Tommy maybe respond first, or?
No, for me there is no problem in intervening. Just okay. I wanted to make sure that Elena had finished her intervention. Sorry if I didn't. I wasn't present for the very final part, but I followed everything, and I already read the book, so. Okay, so my intervention would be about the ecological part of the book. And since I work on topics which are, we can define about the philosophy of ecology, I would like to talk about environment from the point of view of the science of ecology. So, ecology is a relatively new discipline. It emerged indeed a few years before the 20th century. And it has a complex origin and an even more complex history. Elena, in her book, sketches some salient and important passages of the history of ecology. And I think that the history of ecology could be interpreted as the history of the efforts that have been made to better understand the nature of environment. What is the environment? So we can see that the environment has already been treated in other disciplines. For example, the example which is most relevant also in the confrontation with ecology is biology, which is an older and better established science compared to ecology. But then the environment was studied only in function of the object of study of the biology, which was the organism. While in ecology, the environment is the central object of study. So it is studied per se, no? But actually, the environment is not an easy object to study. So, for example, it is not so easy to define what it is. And Elena's book kind of tries to show that in the historical part. What are the boundaries of the environment? How can we arrive to give a rigorous definition of it? And how much does the environment influence the organisms? And on the other end, how much organisms influence the environment? So ecology tries to explore the relationship between the organisms and the environment. And this is the main object of the science of the ecology, at least according to its official founder, which is morphologist Ernst Haeckel, which coined also the term ecology in the 19th century. And currently, the form that the environment has assumed as the object of study of ecology is that of the ecosystem. So according to the scientific approach of ecology, the environment manifests itself in a systemic form. So it is constituted by a set of complex systems which are made of diverse components and perform various kinds of processes. And this kind of complex systems in ecology are indeed given the name of ecosystems. So again, it is not clear nor uncontroversial how are ecosystems to be defined, how many of them are there in the world, are they real objects that exist in the world, or are they just more or less arbitrary selections of environment that we cut for some cognitive or practical purposes. But whatever the answer is to those questions, and I'm not gonna go into this matter, the essential property of ecosystems, the property that distinguish them from casually selected parcels of environment, for example, is that ecosystems are constituted by biotic components, namely the organisms, and abiotic components, so the physico-chemical elements. And by, most importantly, the significant relation that occur between the two, whatever, again, significant in this in this case means, and we could make another talk entirely dedicated about this. But what matters is that with the lens of the ecosystem, it is possible to observe both the influence of the environment on the organism and that of the organism on its environment, even if this kind of interaction is often of a very complex and multi-layered nature, and also not always linear, not so easy to track. Elena's book explores some of these interactions, mainly using ecological notions such as niche construction and ecological engineering that she also quoted in her intervention. But what I want to focus on now in the remaining part of this intervention, and then I will maybe open to discussion starting from here, is the approach to ecosystems that has been displayed by the science of ecology. This approach has not been homogeneous through time, nor coherent through the history of ecology. It's not always been the same. We can individuate two main paradigms in ecology that tried to that are very different in their approach to ecosystems and hence to environment. From one side, we have the so-called balance of nature paradigm, and on the other side, we have the so-called flux of nature paradigm. The first concedes ecosystems and hence the environment as a harmonic and self-regulating whole. In this view, the relationship between the components of the ecosystem are thought to have the inherent aim to maintain or bring to some kind of stability of the whole. So in this paradigm, which is also the classical paradigm of ecology, there is the assumption that there are laws in nature that maintain the right proportions, the efficiency of functions, and the order of nature. And these laws are thought to be at work despite interferences that can come, for example, from humans, which in this paradigm are considered as external and separated from their environment, and hence from any ecosystem. On the other side, we have the other paradigm, the flux of nature, which rejects this idea of an inherent aim that would guide the natural processes toward equilibrium, and on the contrary, concedes ecosystems as an ever-changing result, an ever-changing products of their history and of their interactions. So according to this more modern paradigm, which is also, it is the main paradigm now in ecology, and it is the widely accepted one. Ecosystems are constantly in a process of change, which derives from their internal processes by the interactions that they have with what is located outside the boundaries, and by the influence of unpredictable events and also difficult to calculate effects of the interactions between their components. And among their components, there is also humans. So it is not possible, according to the flux of nature advocates, to search for a plan that nature will display in order to perpetuate itself. However, this very same idea, so this idea of a plan of nature, of inherent laws of nature to maintain a sort of harmony or equilibrium, which is inherent as an essential property of it. So this idea, it's still alive and present in many kinds of discourse. For example, in common thinking or environmental movements, there's still this talk about the balance of nature that should be re-established by letting nature do its course without interfering with it. This is still a very common discourse that is being made. But there are doubts that this is an appropriate approach, because first of all, it assumes that humans are not part of nature, and hence they are considered as external agents compared with their environments, no? And in second instance, nowadays, it is not sure that there is still something that we can call nature and that can go on doing its own course without our interference. And this was clear in Elena's talk. So both these assumptions could be wrong, and things could be a bit more complicated than this. So maybe the flux of nature paradigm, by stressing the importance of the individual trajectories of the components of ecosystems, could be a more appropriate one to face some of the problems that we face in this time confronted with our environment. So according to this paradigm, the living world, humans included, are an active part in shaping and in constructing their environment. So we saw the ecological engineers, for example, no? And at the same time, they have also an active role in making it persist or in making it collapse on the other end. So this is especially true for humans, especially now that humans have gained a kind of power and the role of a big force in the world, so that at the point that some have coined the term Anthropocene to describe this property of the human species, which equates them to a geological force in the planet history. So in conclusion, and opening to maybe more discussion, the flux of nature paradigm could be maybe the most appropriate one to inform our environmental practices, especially in the field of environmental management, which is still kind of influenced by the classical paradigm of ecology, so by the idea of a harmony of nature, of a balance of nature to be reestablished or to be maintained. The alternative paradigm, the flux of nature one, which is also quoted in Elena's book, could be a better one to also account for the role that the human species could have in our environmental practices. And yeah, I conclude by this, wondering what Tomislav or Elena have to say about this.
Thank you, Lara. I would perhaps invite Tomislav to intervene, and then we shall transition to a more open Q&A.
I would like to first thank Elena and Lara both for thought-provoking exposition. I must admit, although I'm trained in philosophy, it's been a while, it's been 3 decades since I've done my training in philosophy, and I did very little in philosophy of nature. And also I do not read Italian or understand very much of Italian, except a couple of swear words and ciao. So I didn't have a chance to read the book. So I will just ask questions, couple of questions to Elena first and foremost. Based on her presentation, and I did read the first introductory historical chapter on the notion of environment, which is great, and I warmly recommend it once it comes out in translation to all of those who don't read Italian, to peruse the chapter and the book. No, so, but I would like to start with a philosophical question. The debate in many ways, philosophically, is an old one, how to differentiate between the whole and parts of it. And in this case, how to differentiate humans as a part of nature, which humans obviously as living organisms are, and how to conceptualize how humans are different than other organisms within nature, and how humans shape non-human nature as a whole. And I would be curious to hear Elena's thoughts about Spinozian approach to this matter. Spinoza famously differentiates between natura and naturans, so it's self-affecting substance that he also calls God. So nature or God are for him the same word, and nature that is finite, that was created, natura naturans, naturata, and that would include many ontologically differentiated structures. So it's a question of unity of substance and different modalities of existence, of onteic structures, this including humans. Second question would relate to the political weight of this conundrum, and I guess this is what drives also Elena's intervention with this book, and that is humans are obviously have become sort of geological force. As Lara has said, they are shaping, according to scientists, the present geological age of the development of Earth as a system. Humans have disrupted a number of processes of that Earth system that were in a relatively stable condition of flux variability over the last 10,000 years, and that stable variability or variability within certain boundaries of these processes have enabled human societies to thrive and eventually gain this geological force, so much so that they have shifted all these processes beyond their Holocenic boundaries and off kilter, endangering the existence of humans or large part of humanity going forward, but also huge elements of non-human biotic nature, primarily large mammals. Just recently, this week, I think there was a study published that wild species mammals or wild mammals are only 10% of biomass of humans and livestock bred for human use. So obviously there is some differentiation that we need to make in order to intervene with some politics in changing that course of things. Maybe we could argue also that things cannot be changed, and then let's let it be, as Anna has said, and maybe we need to accept that as humanity. But I guess humans being humans can't do that, and it's then the question: how do we differentiate processes that emerge from society and that drive this huge transformation of planetary environment as different in quality from that of non-human nature, particularly animals, other animals than human. And frequently that debate revolves around the question of agency. You know, how do we see the agency of humans as opposed to agency of other animals, ecosystems, technological apparati, and so on and so forth. And there is a tendency, particularly in humanities, to equate different forms of agency. However, the problem is that we can obviously, at least at the level of common sense, differentiate different forms of agency. For instance, for inert matter, we can hardly say that it has capacity to act that is not mere reaction, refraction, catalysis. For basic forms of biotic life, there is certainly differentiation that creates homeostasis with or boundaries, and then homeostatic conditions with the environment, or differentiation between the organism and the environment. At a higher level, we have intentionality. And then what's maybe particular to humans is very complex symbolic structures of causation. For instance, think of money. Money has enormous power to cause processes to happen, and very detrimental processes to happen. And we could claim that money and such structures, for instance, state would be another one, are specific to humans. So there is some exceptionality. And that exceptionality then is the question of how do we politically change those complex symbolic structures to reverse the detrimental processes that these symbolic structures have caused. So many people speak of the Capitalocene or Plantationocene to indicate that it's not humanity as a whole, because humans have very different capacity to act, and then it's not necessarily humans as animals and humans in environment, but the structures that they have constructed and the inequalities of economic and other forms of power that create both discrimination in the social world, but also in huge destabilization of non-human systems. And then maybe as a third question, I would like to contend with the notion of production. Obviously, within a world differentiated into social world and non-human nature, production is usually ascribed to social world, but we know that a lot of detrimental effects of human actions or actions of human-built complex symbolic structures are absorbed by the capacities, regenerative capacities of past and present of nature. So we could in many ways speak in the world of human production that there is a lot of counter-production happening on the other side. So I would be interested if you, Elena, see a way to complicate the notion of production. And then as a last, it's not maybe a question, it's a reference, let's say it's a reference. No, Peter Haff has coined the notion of technosphere to designate an additional sphere to the Earth system alongside atmosphere, biosphere, cryosphere, lithosphere. And he goes on to claim that it has, in a way, assumed autonomy beyond human agency, because humans depend on technological systems just as they depend on other geological spheres for their reproduction, yet technology is so entangled and complex that it cannot be controlled by intentional actions of humans. It can be changed and all that, but it has a requirement of self-reproduction. And for that, it depends on huge intakes of energy and other matter from other geological spheres. So I would I would maybe ask Elena for you to reflect on that, and Lara, please add to any of these if any of these sort of echoes resonates with your points.
Okay, thank you both very much. Tom, you asked too many questions and too difficult and huge and big questions. No, thank you very much, really, for. I would proceed like this, if you agree. I will try to say something small about everything you said, okay, small. So we can also hear maybe some questions from the people attending if they have curiosities, etc. So it can become, in my opinion, it can become now a more, let's say, collective discussion. But still, I will try to say something. First, actually, about the flux of nature paradigm. Okay, I will be short with Lara because we discussed these things quite often. So I don't want to steal time. But one thing that somehow bothers me is not that not bothers me, but it is okay. Is the fact that I don't think that buy into the flux of nature paradigm allows a, let's say, let it go attitude or anything goes attitude. Okay, so I think that buy into a flux of nature paradigm and making the right, so to speak, environmental intervention can go hand in hand. Yet, what I think that buying to the flux of nature bringing to light is some human bias or some. So the idea, when you think about conservation, okay, so we speak about nature conservation, okay, of course we can distinguish between preservation, so the idea of keeping the intact nature as it is, okay, the pristine nature, to save the pristine nature from human beings, okay. And in that sense, my question is whether we are going against the fact that, and this is also included in the Aristotelian view of nature as a principle of movement, okay. So when we are trying to fix nature as it is, are we going against, are we making an operation that goes against nature, okay? And in that sense, nature conservation, better called nature preservation, has been accused of being a sort of a reactionary operation, okay? But on the other hand, okay, of course, this does not mean that everything goes, okay? So something is a pollutant even in a flux of nature paradigm. Something can damage nature also in a flux of nature paradigm. But what I find interesting is this idea that when we speak about nature conservation, we normally have this idealized view of nature as a landscape, right? So those landscapes that we like and we wanna somehow fix them. Okay, so I think that there is a conceptual and maybe practical tension there. And I think that environmental aesthetics is quite working on that direction recently. So to somehow work on the biases that we can have. So as for some questions, yes, those are, as I was saying, those are very huge questions. So I will just say some spare thoughts. Okay, about Spinoza, I have to confess that I didn't speak of Spinoza in the book. I'm not a Spinozan expert. And I think that in order to rightly speak about, to speak rightly about an author, you need to have studied a lot, especially an author like Spinoza. Okay. Yet, what I think is that somehow this idea that this idea of distinguishing nature, somehow nature as a principle and nature as a product, right? So this idea of a continuous production, and then when nature fixes itself in products, is important in conservation for what is somehow connected to what also Lara was saying. So this idea of flux, right? So we somehow, nature is a flux, okay, and ecosystems do not have a fixed trajectory, and they are not joining any fixed status, because they are continuously producing themselves, okay, and in producing themselves, they change, okay. So about the production of the productions of this flux. In that sense, I really like the image that another philosopher gave, who is Schelling, that express a similar concept in saying that nature is like a river, okay? And in this river, you have the vortexes, okay? So the products of nature are somehow produced, are not different in the sense that they are the same, okay, and are kept as they are from forces of nature, okay. And that is, I think, a beautiful image. But I'm really no expert in Spinoza, so I don't want to say anything more about that. Mainly because it is recorded, so I don't want to risk too much. I prefer to stay on the safe side. I already said too much about Schelling. I have a lot of friends who are experts on Schelling, so I don't want to. Yeah, you know, when you touch the classics, you risk too much. Then about terms unorganized to Anthropocene. Whoa, yes. About the Anthropocene, what I try to I embraced is a view that that happened mainly that, okay, I think that a possible key of interpretation of the Anthropocene is the niche construction process at let's say at a majestic level. Okay, so normally when and I spoke about that in the book extensively, in the sense that I tried to, okay, if you think about something biological that becomes a geological force, okay, you have a precedent in the history of life, okay, which is the Great Oxidation Event. Okay, when the cyanobacteria started to produce more oxygen, and they started to put a lot of oxygen in the atmosphere, and they changed the composition of the atmosphere, and the organisms that were not well adapted to breathe oxygen, they just died. So that has been probably the largest mass extinction that never happened. Okay, some others adapted, but that also opened, let's say, some path to open the possibility of new metabolic path and to aerobic life, right? So the life as we know it. And so that process, according to some authors, can be seen as a niche construction process on a massive level. Okay, so the organisms build their environment, and as a result, they change the selective pressures on themselves, and they change in return. Okay, and that is also the idea, which is at least at the very beginning the idea in the theory of the biosphere by Vernadsky, and also in the, but I don't have to teach you, of course, these in the Gaia hypothesis, in the very first 2 articles about the Gaia hypothesis. So before saying that Gaia is an organism, etc., etc. So what is the difference? That cyanobacteria couldn't avoid to do what they did, right? While in principle, human beings can. In principle, why I'm saying can? Why I am saying in principle? Because and here I go to the last question, but then I go back to the question on the symbolic system, because yes, the technosphere. Okay, Vernadsky already spoke about something similar, which was the noosphere, right? So the idea that we should add a specific sphere for human beings somehow, a sphere produced by human beings, so that the, let's say, natural spheres are not enough to account for human beings. I don't know, I don't agree with that actually, because it seems to me that we go back to the human exceptionalism that I don't like very much. But if the technosphere is actually autonomous, right, and so it has a, let's say, a life for itself, life in a metaphorical sense, for itself, so it has become independent from human being, then it is not so clear if we can do something, right? So at the end, there is the risk is that we have become just like a cyanobacteria. So I still think that we can do something actually. So, and as for the symbolic system, yes, for instance, one idea is that one thing that makes our species, let's say, peculiarity of our species is that of having a symbolic system, right? I'm not entirely in agreement with that, even though I think it is one of the best candidates of expressing some peculiarity of our species, in the sense that I think that, yeah, it is the complexity of our symbolic system, because also other species have a symbolic system. Probably our symbolic system is more complex, but Eva Jablonka and Marion Lamb speak about these in their book Evolution in 4 Dimensions, in which, let's say, the specific kind of inheritance of human beings is symbolic inheritance, because they say human beings have this symbolic, the very complex symbolic system that other organisms do not have. Okay, but I think it is a difference of degree, not of a substance, so to speak. Also, bees have a symbolic system. They dance to show the right way to find food, right? Yet it doesn't. It is not so. I mean, our symbolic system has some peculiarities, like I don't know. We can, for instance, use different means to express just the same idea, right? We can write a song, paint something, or write a book, okay, expressing the very same idea. And probably other organisms are not able to do that. So in that sense, our symbolic system seems to be actually a peculiarity of our species. I think it is a question of degree. But just because, as I was saying, I don't like very much the idea of a human exceptionalism, except for probably being able to think about the environmental crisis and trying to do something about the environmental crisis. Other organisms probably don't do that. Yeah. So I don't know if I took too much time, and if I did it, sorry for that. And now I leave you just to, because I want to try to switch on my light, because it is quite dark in my room, and it's not so easy. So don't look at me. Yeah.
Thank you, Elena. While you readjust the light conditions, bringing...
So, yes, better.
Wonderful, yes. So maybe this is a good moment to open up a more, the conversation. I can see there's two hands up, and then I have also one contribution in the chat. So I would invite Letizia first, then Javier, and then I shall maybe read Marina's point to you. And are you happy, Elena, if I let the questions take place and then you get back, you or also the other discussant maybe have a round after that, maybe?
Yes.
That works. Okay, great. So Letizia.
Good evening, and thanks for the presentation. It was very interesting. Since I've been working also on some of these topics, I was wondering, as far as the question of the difference between artificial and natural things is concerned, I was wondering if, from a phenomenological perspective, I speak as a scholar of Arendt, I study Hannah Arendt, the artificial character of man depends on the fact that they live in an artificial environment. That is, what I mean is, men build a world of artificial things through which they separate themselves from natural things, and thus make them something else with respect to them. I'm not sure, however, if this position is reducible to the Stuart Mill's one. And the second question was, I don't know if to Lara or also to Professor today, about the idea of the flux of nature. Yes, in the beginning I had the impression that meant somehow accepting everything. It is that man should do everything since nature is able to. Since nature means adapting to the inputs coming from all its natural beings, but it was clear that that doesn't mean so. But my question is, doesn't this approach focus only on life itself, excluding the environment? That is, doesn't it think of nature as an ensemble of beings whose life, in general, that is excluding the individuals, continues whatever happens. That is, individuals or also species might die because of the changes in the environment, but life as a whole continues. Therefore, it's okay. These are my two questions, and thanks again for the presentation.
Thank you, Letizia. Thank you very much. Are we going to answer two questions one by one, or
I was suggesting not. I would collect them,
you collect
just
them.
in the interest of time, so then you have a chance to resonate.
Yes.
Maybe you have a last round with three of you panelists.
Okay.
So Javier, thanks, and then I can see Sergey next.
Thank you for the great presentation. I also, as Letizia, I'm very much into this topic, so it resonated in many ways. Now, I recognize that you come from the analytic tradition of philosophy because of how you deal with the arguments, how you are putting in the logic there. However, I think that the philosophical tradition, broadly speaking, has also made some other great advances during the 20th century. Letizia mentioned already Hannah Arendt, and I think it comes from in the German tradition has. You didn't mention the Umwelt by Jacob von Wexkull, and I think this is a very important particle, and it totally changes the way to approach these kind of concepts from this dualistic point, nature and the natural and the artificial. It really changes the game, I think. Not that I mean, you can start where you want, you can start with Aristotle, but then the point is like to come to something into the 21st century would give you like a lot broader perspective, maybe. Wexkull was used by Heidegger in his notion of the being in the world, for example. Heidegger has this definitions in his book on problems of phenomenology. He makes the comparison between the world of a rock, the world of an animal, and the world of a human being, which relates to this notion of Umwelt by Wexkull. I think that's a major turning point also in the discussion. And later on, you mentioned the notion of the milieu. There is this very famous, probably I didn't read your book, obviously, but then maybe you know the famous essay by Canguilhem, the history of the notion of the milieu, which relates to all these authors. It's a very easy to follow. And in that essay, I think also Canguilhem makes an incredible contribution in understanding the milieu. And this comes all the way to the cyberneticians of the 20th century. I think what it has been talked also a lot about this notion of Spinoza. It goes into the notions of Varela and Maturana and their book Autopoiesis and Cognition from the 80s. And I think this is exactly where we're discussing, but without the paraphernalia of this divide. I think it's closer to what Lara was describing on a biological perspective, which is a completely different approach, but still in philosophical terms. So it really gets you faster to like a philosophical discussion in these topics. Just to give you an example, that like the Wexkull in his essays, he mentions how an sea urchin, a seeigel in German, sea urchin in English, and I don't know other names, but it's this animal that has points, and then he describes the world of this sea urchin in a fantastic way. It's like really like how to describe another existence in the earth and the environment around it, and it's completely away from all the things we project onto it. And it's full of artificiality also, it's full of different things. And Maturana makes exactly the same with the description of the eye of a frog. And this really has an impact on how we, the cyberneticians started like talking about, these computational procedures. In the end, just this goes on that direction. My question is on the philosophical side. Wouldn't it be also productive to think on breaking the centrality of the individual? For example, like when we do this research, when we approach these problems, we're part of the problem and the problem itself. So it goes back to Schrödinger's paradox on the watcher, that while we are doing the watching, we are changing the problem itself. So the position of the individual, coming from a philosophical perspective, is totally affected by the notion on how we look at the environment in this kind of more broad way. That will be my question.
Thank you, Javier. Sergey, perhaps trying to summarize points. Thank you.
Thank you for this great presentation, and I guess it is a very interesting book. I also dealt with the problem of natural artificial distinction, And as far as I remember, I've read your article in English about this distinction around a couple of years ago. My question, I have a lot of questions, of course, but probably I choose one about the immersion of this problem, of this distinction, because you are dealing with conservation, but the inversion of the problem of distinction between natural and artificial is the problem of patentability of genes. Probably you know the history about genetics and court decisions about patentability of BRCA gene variant, which is probably rather common among some human populations. So they had, firstly, they obtained the patent, and then in around 10 years ago, courts refused even the right of companies to make patents for genes that are natural. So the irony is that court in Australia and in United States, they based their decision on different arguments, like one of them told that it is a natural object, the other told that it is something like only information that we can read in the book of nature. Yes, the result is that we have common intuitions, common sense about this border. But what my question, where do you think could be the solid ground for this distinction? Is it an ontological distinction in a true sense of ontology, like metaphysics, or it is common sense, because all of us don't feel comfortable, for example, with the idea of patentability of natural genes or genomic variants. Or probably that is only a practical distinction that we need to deal for each problem separately. For example, one national park, one reservation needs one distinction, the other establishment of the other reservation needs some particular nuanced distinction, and so on. Thanks a lot, and I will be looking forward for the translation of your book.
Thank you, Sergey, also for your question. I will very briefly add to the queue. Also, Marina was wondering whether you, as a plural, you on the panel, might have any specific theory or books explaining how is the question of this, the matter of the cyanobacteria, how they became considered a geological force. I think you were referring to that event. When oxygen becomes prominent in the atmosphere as a prequel to the current framing of the Anthropocene. I wonder, sorry.
Valeria, sorry if I interrupt you, because this last question, I haven't understood the first part. So the question is...
It's a very direct question, more references on the theory or
more references.
On this, considering cyanobacteria became as a geological force. So more on that. It's in chat, so maybe that is also a place.
You just put it on the internet, in the sense that it is an evolutionary event. I don't know, maybe major transition in evolution. You can find something, but that is too difficult. So I can send you some specific. If you write me an email, that would be easier, because I have some article, but I don't think there is maybe there is some specific book, but not a philosophical one. But of course, I can send you directly the article that I used to speak about that in the book. Thank you.
Yeah, No, that's
Okay, so-
that's wonderful, and we can definitely take you up the offer. If anybody wants to continue conversations with Elena, we can maybe put you in touch. But without further ado, Helena, how do you feel if I allow maybe Lara, Tomislav, and then you to really move towards wrapping up and addressing some of the points? I'm very sorry, the time is always something that as human species seem to be very poor of. Yeah, I would propose this order: Lara, then Tomislav, and then Elena, with some concluding remarks going in the direction of an answer to some of the points raised.
Okay, so I will be very brief. I just wanted to answer Letitia's questions about the flux of nature paradigm. The question of the values that we attach to natural objects and processes is a secondary question that comes after some progressions in the scientific records and empirical records that ecology managed to accomplish during its history. So the change of paradigm was primarily motivated by a better empirical record of what actually happens in nature. So ecologists realized that nature was not working according to the balance of nature paradigm, because the data and the research that ecologists were making on the field was not consistent with the results of that paradigm and the theories of that paradigm. So the flux of nature was initially presented as a more realist account of what actually happens in nature. And the question of the values, so life as a whole continues, and no matter if what persists, so insofar life as a general movement persists. This is one of the interpretations that we can give to this paradigm, but it is not the one that I share, because actually the question of what actually persists and how it persists is an important question to me, which must be addressed also from the point of view of the flux of nature paradigm. And if I can give just one glimpse of one possible direction for an answer, I think the concept of resilience tries to address this question. So how does it happen that a certain ecosystem persists in face of changes and in face of disturbances? And of course, when we started to talk about resilience, we also must call into the scene the question of the values, because if we search for a resiliency of a certain ecosystem that we are interested about, of course, we give value to that ecosystem and we want it to persist in a certain way. But these are just some openings that we can have starting from the flux of nature paradigm.
Okay, thanks.
I do apologize. I had to leave for the next appointment, so I'm on the move. I won't turn on my camera. I don't have much to add. I feel that the question of complex symbolic structures, be they or different in terms of degree or in terms of quality, I feel are essential for the future, both for human species, but many other species, and humans have a lot of say in all of that. So we should by no means, I think, divest from that capacity to act and responsibility to act. So, and I feel that everybody's on the same page. I understand that the debate of ontology might have different level of abstraction, and then the implications are not immediate on that question. So, and I do really appreciate the food for thought that Elena's exposition and Lara's exposition have given to all of us, I guess, this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Toma. We don't want to keep you. We see that you're on your path, on your journey. Thank you very much for being with us.
Indeed, thank you. Elena, your last words to wrap up.
Yes,
somehow. This is a lot of directions.
I will answer shortly to Sergei Sevchenko. Okay. Yes, thank you. I think that is interesting, and that is probably so about the idea that maybe we can have a sort of we should speak about nature and artificial case by case somehow. So maybe when we build national park and when we decide whether genes have to be patented, we should apply and decide whether the distinction apply case by case. And I quite agree with that. I think that in a way I am a sort of conventionalist. So what I think is that and in that I agree with Elliot Sober that I quoted before, and also with John Stuart Mill a lot of time before him, is that natural artificial distinction, I mean, that naturalness is not a normative notion. So saying that something is natural, that doesn't mean that that thing is good or is bad. Okay, that is our responsibility to decide whether something is good or bad. Okay, so saying that somehow Sober was saying in that article that I suggest to read, because it is a very nice article according to me, and it is entitled Some Philosophical Problems for Environmentalists. And what he says is that, saying that somehow charging naturalness with a normative power somehow is a way of responsabilizing, keeping responsibility away from us. Okay, and I quite agree with that. And I would go, if asked, I would go for a conventionalist and case by case solution, because we have to be realistic. So somehow the distinction is very well entrenched in our mind. It is very used. It is a very intuitive one. So we cannot just say, yeah, let's forget about nature and naturalness and so on and so forth, even though some eliminativists suggest that. Okay. So I think that I am quite sympathetic with what you suggested, and I will end trying to answer both the other Sergei, right, and Letizia. Yep. Okay. My main problem in writing the book was deciding what to keep and what to leave out. Okay, because there are so many ways of facing these the topics that I try to discuss in the book. So of course I decided on the basis of my education. So I'm mainly educated in theoretical philosophy and then in the philosophy of biology. So I started from science actually. So I wanted an account of environment that was scientifically sounded. So I tried to look mainly at the results of evolutionary biology, developmental biology, and scientific ecology. Okay. Yet about making choices, about making choices, I don't like very much the distinction between continental and analytical philosophy. It is true that it can seem that I have a sort of analytic way of proceeding. Okay, that does not mean, in my opinion, that I am an analytic philosopher. In the book, for instance, I devoted a lot of space to the notion of Umwelt, because I think it is fundamental in understanding what the environment is. Because the Umwelt is a way of, let's say, is the way in which the organism, the correspondence between organism and the environment happens. Okay, so in that sense, I have treated two different ways of reaching the correspondence between organisms and their environment. One is adaptation, okay, which is the evolutionary way, and the other one is what Uexküll proposed. So it is a transcendental construction. Okay, so are the organisms are adapted to their environment because they build in a transcendental Kantian way. So the idea of what Uexküll wanted to do was to build biology on a Kantian basis. So he was speaking about a phenomenologic world, and Uexküll is also being considered a phenomenologist by someone. So I treated extensively Uexküll because in constructing my book, that notion was fundamental, was important. I didn't treat Heidegger, for instance, because I don't think that Heidegger understood Uexküll. I think that he gave a wrong interpretation of what Uexküll was saying. And I don't agree with the human exceptionalism that I can find in Heidegger. I wanted an non-anthropocentric theory. I wanted to build a non-anthropocentric theory of the environment. So I wanted to work on a notion of the environment that could work for every organism. So what I was saying is just that, when you write a book on such an enormous topic, also in a quite arrogant manner, because I say, yeah, let's do philosophy of the environment. But actually, I wanted to write a book for my students. Okay, so I tried to build a path somehow and to give a possible view. And yes, also again, Sergei, yes, the essay of Canguilhem, that has been my departure point in building the history of the concept. So I used authors coming from very different times and very different traditions, because I tried to let's say, to construct a narrative. Okay, and of course, when you pick someone, you leave someone else out of the narrative. But you also try to build a narrative with a sense, a coherence, and a competence, so to speak. So if I'm not an expert on Heidegger, I cannot write a book on Heidegger. Still, I'm not an expert on anything, but I know Uexküll quite well, and I like it very much. So yeah, that's just my way of concluding, I think. But thank you very much for all the questions. And I hope that I answered satisfactorily.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Elena.
Okay, thank you.
Elena Casetta wrote a great book that we wait in translation, The Philosophy of the Environment. It's an ambitious project. I really think this was going to be actually one of my questions. How do you tackle such a huge task? And the editorial choices need to be ambitious. And yeah, I really love your mapping and your answers there. Thank you everyone for being with us. I really look forward to the next opportunity to continue conversations live online in these very complex spheres that we're all implicated in. Thank you, Lara. Also, I really look forward to hear more about your work, and good luck with the thesis. I imagine that's always due. Yeah, these will be recorded and shared publicly, so I hope if anybody wants to return to some of the references, you can find these on the YouTube channel of the Center for Advanced Studies, University of Rijeka. That is all for me. Good night, everyone. Have a lovely evening. And thanks, Tom, who
Thank you.
already left. But okay.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much for everything, for having me and for your attention, etc., etc. It has been a pleasure. See you soon. Okay.
Thanks. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.